My talk today is perhaps directed by the fact that in a museum we on a day-to-day, in fact on a 24-hour basis, are looked at as by the public and I think we're for the most part trusted. So my perspective is from that of a scientist, and I take it for granted that scientists are, for the most part, relatively honest. Yesterday's discussion about medical ethics and the problems that come when people are faced with large awards of either just for doing research or signing their name, so on, obviously is creating a diversion from that. But that was well covered, and I'm not going to say too much more about it today. One thing I'd like to ask is, being a museum and from a perspective of a science museum that uses interactives, how many people have been in a museum in the last year, say? Yeah, I'm not surprised. Now, the next question is, for those of you that are consider yourself STS people, stick up your hand and hold it there for a minute, and put up your other hand if you have had at least 2 courses in science in the undergraduate level. Yeah, okay, good. I was expecting that there wouldn't be quite so many, because I think for STS studies to be really effective, the practitioners really do need to have some background and understand the philosophy and where scientists are coming from. And I think the thing that I always go back to when we're talking to students about science and what it means to be a scientist, scientists work from, or mainly attracted to the discipline because they find the research and their work fun and enticing, and they don't mind going to work every day. In fact, many of them will go 7 days a week. Now, whoops, sorry, back one. The next question is, do you understand the difference between a science museum and a science center? Because you'd be surprised at how many people don't understand that when we're talking to our friends in the museum world. And I've given some of the differences here. The basic, of course, is that museums have artifacts. And I want to read a quote from Paolo Galluzzi, who's the director at the Institute Museum of Science in Florence. And a number of years ago, he said, thinking about the effectiveness of science centers, and he says the space they hold, that is old-style museums, is abandoned. Sorry. The space they abandoned is occupied by new, radically different structures, the new innovative science centers that developed in the U.S. in the 1950s. Devoid of historical collections, they aim to stimulate the visitors to personally experience the discovery of scientific phenomenon. European museums, with their extraordinary collections, have now shown the inclination to adopt the methods and communication strategy of such technological exhibits. While working to preserve the treasures of the past, they offer interactive exhibits and multimedia displays. The fundamental functions and goals of museums have changed entirely. And that is, I think, a valid statement. However, in recent years, well, in fact, very recently, within the last 3 or 4 years, I think perhaps, Robert, you might comment on that during the question period, I've seen a shift of science centers going back to closer to a science museum model in which artifacts are becoming more accepted. Now, there is certainly a group of science center advocates that would never do that, but the other half is, or third, I guess I would say, are actually seeing the advantage of having real artifacts that can draw the attention and by which they can put the interactives that they have in a context of science and technology and some of the theory. Now, for the Museum of Science and Technology in Ottawa, we're a national organization and we're funded by Canadian Heritage. Our mandate is specifically, I'll just paraphrase it a bit, to foster scientific and technological literacy throughout Canada by establishing, maintaining, and developing a collection of scientific and technological objects. And this, they, of course, are to be with reference to Canada. And by demonstrating products of science and technology, their economic, social, and cultural relationships with society. Obviously, that mandate impacts how we present our exhibits, and in fact, the exhibit that I've shown here at the bottom, it's an exhibit for which I was the lead curator, but all of the curators were involved, and it is called Innovation Canada. And this particular exhibit, in fact, was, although the idea was originated with myself and our Director General for the museum, and the concept it was certainly endorsed and directed how we should proceed by the Board of Directors. And they wanted an exhibit that developed a sense of pride in Canada and that sort of thing. We did manage to include some areas that questioned the direction of the science and technology and provided examples where there were problems, but overall the message certainly was positive. Now, proceeding. There we go. Just to give you a little bit of more history about or information about our museum, because it is relevant to how we present our material and how people react to it. Our museum is 40 years old this year. We were put in a temporary building, which we're still in. We've been working for 5 years and have a vision for a new museum, which will change who and what we present. But at the present, our current audience are largely parents and children. And in fact, when we start developing an exhibit, who's it directed to? Our interpretive people always want to say families with children. And I keep saying, well, that means very little to me because you've got people on either ends of the spectrum of the knowledge gap. Then students, all levels, we get, well, I'll give you this stats on that in a minute. Caregivers, surprisingly, these can be commercial daycare centers and bringing all the kids. You get the collectors and techies, of course, and then professionals and researchers occasionally come by, including Edward and Jonas Invitec, glad to say. Now, the audiences for our particular museum these days are about 350, 400,000 visitors, of which 125 to 150,000 come with classes. And a large portion of those come in May and June once the teachers get bored with teaching. So we end up being the teachers at the end of the year. Our website, all sites get somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million visitors a year, growing roughly 30% a year or thereabouts. And the next slide, I'll talk about the percentage of students, because there's very clear evidence that we get a large portion of students. Now, in surveys, we have a person that does surveys on a regular basis, and you'll see that the I'm having trouble reading that from this angle, and it's not on my screen. High school, 16%, college and university, 34%, and so on. So you get the distinct impression immediately that the adults coming are pre-selected to people, as you would expect, with higher education than the average person. And of those that came in 2004, the visitors were asked, what's your primary interest? And science is the biggest one, history, fair ways back, technology, of course, and then the other smaller ones. The website stats, and these are a few years old now, I think they end in 2004. These dips here correspond to July and August every year. And they dropped by 40%. So clearly our website, or the ones that are represented in data here, are geared directly to students, and the teachers direct them there. And I would suggest that this is one piece of evidence that the teachers think our site is trusted, and obviously the material they get there goes through the review process, and they can expect that it's fairly safe in the content that they'll encounter. One audience I didn't mention back there, actually, which I find kind of interesting, is in the U.S. these days. Some museums are actually identifying teenagers and young adults who are on dates as a target audience, and the reason is that it's a safe environment, which it hasn't happened here in Canada, but I find that an interesting change in the profile of visitors. One other thing that I perhaps should mention about the educational information that we provide. In Canada, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, there is a pan-Canadian curriculum for science. And it's set at 2 or 3 different levels, and they establish what each province has similar sort of thing, but there is a pan-Canadian, and because we're a national institution, we follow those kinds of guidelines. However, the one problem is following up on Sheila's comments last night about the public understanding of science. I'm going to give you 5 numbers, 5 age groups, and I'd like you to, one thing that Sheila didn't mention was and she probably, I know why she didn't, but I'd like you to guess at what the average age of science knowledge is for Canadians.
You have it up there.
Okay.
I think it's 14.
14, okay. Anyway, you've got the answer. To me, that seems quite low, and I will comment on Sheila's comments about the way that those are done, the tests, and they're not just NSF in the U.S. OECD does them, and there are a number of other people that do similar tests, and the results come fairly similar across the board. And one factor, using one of Sheila's examples last night about the genetically modified tomatoes and whether the tomatoes have genes. For a student that can do some reasoning, the answer is right there, of course, because you've got genetically modified. So if you've got genetically modified, it means that there were genes to begin with. So the use of that kind of information to me is useful, and we use it as the basis for which or by which we determine what kind of material, what level of material material we can include in the exhibits. Now, I mentioned that we have a vision for our new museum when we will get it. That's some time off, I'm sure. But the current age group is probably somewhere between, varies between 8 and 12, but we're gradually increasing that to a 14-year level, because when we move, we want to have changed to some extent the audience that we're getting. We feel that we should be getting, especially in Ottawa where there's so many scientists and engineers, we feel we should be getting people with a higher level of science knowledge. Now, I'm just going to flash it up on the one thing that I think should be in the entranceway to the new museum is an explanation of the scientific method. And everyone here knows it, but people walking into the museum don't necessarily do that. Now, Peter Kalmai yesterday mentioned the problem of talking to scientists and having scientists that can provide information at an appropriate level, and we certainly have that issue as well, because in our exhibit development process we use specialists, scientists and engineers from the day we begin to think about in fact, when we're doing the research, we will have specialists providing information for the researchers, and that process continues all the way through the full development of the exhibit. And a typical exhibit for us, for a moderate to large size exhibit, would take 2 to 3 years to develop. The innovation exhibit that I just flashed up with the Hall of Fame in the core was a little bit of an exception. We did it in 2 years, and it was we were able to do that because we started to include new technologies in the way we develop exhibits, and went through to employing those in the museum, in the exhibit itself as well. One of the challenges, of course, for a museum is you only have so much so much real estate to allow or to devote to text, and it's somewhat exacerbated for us because we are legally required to have French and English. So when you start paring down the messages to a size that the designers and interpretive people will permit, you're down to fairly concise wording, and you start to learn how to identify the key messages and make sure that you're focused on getting those answered. And for scientists, as Peter said, it can be very challenging to get them to come down to the level that you want. But that's what the curatorial staff, of course, is for, is to provide the interface between them. Now I'm going to flash through that fairly quickly. Most of those things were commented on yesterday. And it's that kind of environment that we do as museums work. People see movies that raise questions or suggest what happened, but that's not necessarily the reality. Well, museums aren't always squeaky clean, as you can see, and Jim commented on Piltdown Man. Well, I was just one of a number, and many over the years. One local here, the James Ossuary, was at the ROM, based on fairly suspect science, I would say. And then, of course, the impact of the newly created creation museums, even one in Alberta, the impact of those is yet to be determined. In Canada, the impact is probably or will be probably fairly limited because we don't have the same religious mix as in the U.S. Now, also, there's some other exhibits that might comment on that have had issues in the public and the media. The museum, our museum, years ago had an exhibit bringing research to life, which was sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. And in the development, in those days, they actually let the companies the sponsors review the text and make changes to it. Now, that was a rather sobering occurrence, and we've had considerable difficulty in dealing with that in recent years. And we try to limit it, and we have had some major sponsorships, but they do have an impact on the expectations. Not only your own board. Now, the last one here, I think I should have had Science in American Life from Louisa's comment. I had forgotten that. Now, museums try to deal with current issues, of course, to some extent, and this is where you start to stretch the imagination of the visitors, and you're stretching the credibility of the scientists, because they don't necessarily understand the details of what you're trying to present, and how it actually occurs. So this is where one of the aspect of the trust of museums to present valid information and information that's been validated becomes important. This, of course, was the first image from an scanning tunneling electron microscope, and we have our own atomic force microscope, which is on exhibit in the innovation exhibit. Now, we don't try to tell the visitors how it works, but we try to impress on them what kind of in the evolution of microscopes, how it gets us to a new level. Big science, we don't get scared away from that either. These are two instruments that are on exhibit, and they provide opportunities to get into topics that might otherwise be skipped. And something like tokamak fusion reactor certainly draws their attention, and it does allow you to discuss energy sources and the impact of the types of energy we use and so on. And across from it, we have the only nuclear reactor in a museum in the world, or at least an open museum. This is a ZEEP reactor, which went critical in 1945, just days after the end of the war. And it led to Canada's participation in developing research reactors, the CANDU reactor, and as a result of this activity, we became producers of 50 to 80% of medical isotopes in the world, shipped around the world on a day-to-day basis. So by bringing in artifacts like this, impressive ones, you can get into these stories, and we have hosts, of course, on the floor that can then, and guides that can then get into other detail. And we have other examples of black box technology, which obviously is a very challenging experience. One thing that I would like to try is have one artifact that's set in, and I think it's not an original idea, I'm sure, put an artifact in and then look at it from four perspectives from the different side, from the science, from the technology, and the design and the use. And by doing that kind of interaction with the artifact and the visitors, you can build up an image of the usefulness of such things. Now, one can certainly manipulate the message, and we had an exhibit on polio 3 years ago, which was brought about by the anniversary of the Salk vaccine. And it turns out that Canada was in fact the first country in the world to actually introduce vaccines for children right across the country. And as a result, we wiped out polio within relatively few years. And my personal story was that my mother would not let me go to the town pool because she was afraid that I would contact polio. And I think that was in 1954, which was the last major outbreak in Canada. And that was also very shortly after that the vaccine was begun. So the advantages of museums and we take advantage of it as far as we can for the trust and that visitors see in us. There's 250 years of research and culture of museums. We have multiple layers of review, and however, we're dealing certainly in the last 25 years with the impact of books like Silent Spring and increasingly the problems with medical ethics and that sort of thing. And I'll just put this up to finish, and you can read that while we take questions. Thank you.
Thank you.